All right, well, I think in the interest of time, we will get underway. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Brent Johnson. I am one of the members of the École Lansdowne Parent Council. Specifically, I'm the chair of the Performing Arts Committee, which right now just consists of me, but we have a great parent council. And I appreciate them giving support to organize this event for our community and for other school communities as well, because I know we've got folks joining us from Lansdowne, but Luxton and other points across the city and beyond as well. And nice to see some familiar faces and lots of new ones too. So thanks for joining us. I do want to acknowledge that out of respect for Indigenous people of Manitoba, we at the Winnipeg School Division recognize the schools we attend reside on Treaty 1 land, known as First Nations territory, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I will ask that everyone keep their microphone on mute, just so that we don't get too much cross chatter. I mentioned a little bit earlier, you might want to set your view to speaker view, that way you'll see the active speaker, or feel free to keep it on gallery and you'll get to see everyone's faces. We do have a couple of slide decks as well, so I'll share those when we get to that time. And we'll do a Q&A in two spots. Betty will be speaking first, and we'll do a Q&A right afterwards for those who have questions for her. And then we'll do a Q&A at the end for the other three panelists, and just kind of a general Q&A as well. The chat is on, unlike earlier this evening in the government session. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. So feel free to use the chat. I'll try to kind of keep an eye on that as well as we go along. Yeah, I do want to thank our four panelists this evening for giving us their time and their experience and their expertise. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening for this important discussion about Bill 64, which is set to have profound impact on our education system and our Manitoba society as a whole, if it proceeds in any form that resembles what the government has laid out. I will leave my concerns for another time. We are here to hear from someone other than myself. But I think if you received an email from me, you have my contact info, so feel free to reach out anytime as well. And yeah, so I'll just introduce our four panelists quickly, and then we'll get underway. So joining us this evening, and this will be in the order of speakers. So Betty Edel, who is the Ward 8 trustee, which is the ward that École Lansdowne is situated in, although I actually live in Ward 7. So Betty will, and she's the chair of the Board of Trustees for Winnipeg School Division this year. So she'll be speaking first. Following Betty will be Tamara Kuly, who is a friend and neighbor and parent at École Luxton School and a member of the parent council there as well. Following Tamara will be Jennifer Chen, who is representing the Women of Color Community Leadership Initiative, and is just a wonderful and very busy community activist and supporter to the newcomer community. So I'm always amazed at the things I see you tweeting about and doing. So thank you for your service to our community, Jennifer. And finishing things out for us this evening is Nello Altomare. He's the education critic for the official opposition. And you can guess who that is based on shirt color. And Nello is also a lifelong educator, a retired teacher and school administrator, principal. So we thank you, Nello, for joining us this evening as well. So with that, I am just once again, I'll ask everyone to stay on mute, just so that we can hear as we go along. And I will turn things over to Betty. Thank you for joining us.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming here this evening. I just want to acknowledge and thank you for accommodating my work schedule, because I have to do some work, so I can't stay for the whole meeting. I just wrote down some thoughts I wanted to share with you about what's going on with the province and Bill 64, the Modernization Education Act. So the purpose of it, as stated by the government, is to improve student outcomes under 4 pillars of governance and accountability: high quality learning outcomes, future ready students, and excellence in teaching and leadership. So while the school division shares many of the same views on the key priority actions recommended by the province to improve student outcomes, the actions must be connected to what will benefit the unique needs of supporting our school communities. So part of the concern is, well, there's lots of concerns, but part of the concern is that if you're just coming in and you don't understand the uniqueness of the communities in which we live and the people who live there and the unique needs, and you're just coming with just a plan to fix everything, then I have some concerns. So the provincial government has stated the goal for a complete overhaul of the education system is to ensure our students have the most improved performance in Canada within the next 5 years. And this is particularly irking for me because the provincial data has shown that students in the Winnipeg School Division have made consistent gains and exceeded the provincial mean. So what is it you think you're going to improve? Like, we are constantly working and we are constantly getting better than the provincial means of improving. So I'm unclear what it is they think they're going to improve. Not that we don't always do things to improve, because we are getting better and better, but I don't think we need a complete overhaul of the education. That seems rather dismissive of all of the people who have spent all these years dedicating their lives to teaching students. So it's our belief that the success of a child is not based on a number, but rather to provide a learning environment that fosters the growth of each student's potential and provides equitable opportunity to develop the knowledge, skills, and values necessary for meaningful participation in our society. And what I mean by equitable is if we're just going to get into doing testing on people and not looking at the situations that are going on in the community and the access to resources that will help children and youth and their families be included in society, then we're going to have a big issue. I can tell you, I work in the homelessness field, and the fastest growing population in homelessness is youth. And a lot of it is youth who are aging out of care. So we really need to look at the equity in what we're going on and not just care about numbers. We need to look at the people and what's going on in their lives and the systems that impact them. So excellence looks different for every student, and the K-12 education system must support students with programs and services that are equally diverse. So Bill 64, in my opinion, destroys current school board governance, which allows school boards to address the local needs of school communities and provide programs, services, and supports to ensure a child has all the tools necessary to be successful in school and beyond. And I think this has become very apparent, like when we do budgets, we reach out and ask, like, okay, what are we doing? What do you like? What do you not like? We're not getting any more money. We can't raise taxes. We can't do this. What are we going to do? So we have hard discussions, but at least we're having those discussions, and at least parents can, and they have, and they continue to email about concerns with what's going on in the school. You know, there's just lots of emails I get that I respond to that I can't see if we turn to a different system that is, in my opinion, will be controlled by the government, and they will assign who they want to sit in that committee and that. So I'm not convinced that that will work out well for the community. So a provincial education authority will be established to oversee K-12 education across 15 regions throughout Manitoba. The Provincial Education Authority Board will report to the minister, and include at least 2 elected parent representatives appointed by the minister from the Provincial Advisory Council. 1 parent representative elected from among the school community council executives from each of the 15 regions will be elected to the Provincial Advisory Council for Education. This means 1 parent representative for the city of Winnipeg to advise the Minister of Education and make recommendations about any matter relating to the public education system, including the needs of all the students, schools, and communities, the effectiveness of educational programming, student achievement of learning outcomes. So 1 person for the city of Winnipeg is going to represent us all in all our diversity to speak to these things and give advice to the minister. The members of our board believe that the integrity of the Winnipeg School Division must be maintained as presently constituted in order that students and parents can be guaranteed the same level of programs and services that are available to them in the Winnipeg School Division. I should also let you know I got an email today from the Frontier School Division, and they are requesting a meeting with the minister because they want to be excluded from this because the majority of the children that they are working with, like that's a massive land area that they're working with, and the majority of the children are Indigenous, and there's lots of inequity up there. So they want out of this also. A significant change to the delivery of education has the potential to remove school-based decision-making, holding school boards accountable and transparent, and allocating funding to support programs and services for students based on local needs. It has the potential to become an industrial model of education where equity, learning, and teaching are no longer an individual choice. I would encourage you to voice your concerns to the provincial government, which it seems some of you have this evening, and join other organizations to urge the provincial government to preserve the significance of local school-based decision-making across Manitoba. Reassess the governance and regional model, factoring in student population and the school community representation, specifically for the city of Winnipeg. The provincial government needs to hear the message because they say that we're in a minority. Preserve the significance of local school-based decision-making across Manitoba. Reassess the governance and regional model, factoring in student population and school community representation, especially for Winnipeg. I guess to me, the most important thing that we can do in education is to register to present on Bill 64. And I believe there's a phone number on the Winnipeg School Division where you could phone. And I guess I was thinking about this after I wrote that, and I was thinking, what can we do? And I just have these thoughts. So, like, recommendations from the commission are not consistent with the provincial strategy. So there's 2 separate things happening there. There's a lack of parental involvement. It'll be parent councils versus school community councils, which is what they're looking at. Lack of school-based decision-making. Programs and services will be impacted. How will programs and services not currently being funded by the province continue? Specifically, French immersion is 84% funded by school community, the taxes in the community. So where is that money going to come from? How will the funding be allocated to the 15 regions? How are you going to divide that up? Amalgamation, it has been proven to have no savings. So if we're doing this to think we're going to get savings, that isn't the way it's going to come. And what curriculum changes are going to be developed to indicate that the student success will increase? Like, so what's the plan to make everyone better? So those are my thoughts on Bill 64. Is there any questions?
Yeah, feel free to unmute if you have a question, or you can paste your question in the chat as well.
I have a question. I didn't realize the funding for the French immersion. So I'm wondering, because they kept the DSFM separate from the collective, could you, like, do you think, based on the system, because it's going to end up being the minister, if this is what happens, that decides all, that they wipe out French immersion from our public schools in general within Winnipeg, wherever, across Manitoba, and say, if you want French, you go to DSFM? Like, do you see that being a potential thing that could happen? I don't know. I just thinking about the funding, and because this is supposed to be saving money, I'm wondering, because I don't know.
Well, we don't know either, and they're not saying, so I don't want to say anything because I don't want to upset anyone. But I'm not saying that most of the funding from education should come from property taxes. I mean, if we're all paying taxes, so just take it out of there, because I think of the seniors who really can't afford it going up in that. And because I did a lot of door knocking and there was like lots of concerns. But you know, if we're going to fund it, let's fund it really good, and let's fund all the things that we need to fund in it, you know. So I'm not saying that depend on property taxes. Well, then where's the funding coming from? Just put that on the table, and then people won't have to guess, you know, what's going on, because yes, this is what we're going to do. You know, I'm just so frustrated with all this. I got that property tax rebate check, and I just looked at it and I thought, I'm thankful for it, but for me, you know, 100 and something bucks isn't going to make or break my day. So I'm donating it back to the school division. I'm thinking, you know, all of us who can, whatever we can, and not everyone can give it back, but just all of us who can, like, it's just to send a message. Like, what are we doing? Like, a school division is turning into charity. We're having to give our money back. Like, just, and we got a letter from the government last week, and I just looked at it and I thought, what? This is the same government who is cutting us back our funding from them and saying we can't raise taxes to get funding, telling us not to lay off anyone. Well, okay, if you say that and put a check in there to cover it, but like, why are you writing letters and saying, like, don't lay off anyone, but meanwhile you've been cutting back our money and cutting it back and stopping us from raising the money? So what if you say don't lay off any of the teachers? Put a check and we won't, and we'll all be fine. So now we have to just scramble around, right? And then you have these weird things like $40 million in bureaucracy, and we'll put it back in the schools. So we started working it out, and we thought, that's half a teacher per school. Like, I know $40 million sounds like a whole bunch of money, and it is a whole bunch of money. But if you're going to divide it and you think you're going to put that all back in the school and you have massive more teachers, it's not. It's not at all. So it just seems like smoke and mirrors is going on.
Yeah, thank you,
Sorry,
Betty.
I went off.
No, it's okay. Nello, you had your hand up.
Just in response to French immersion programs won't be at risk. I can't imagine them doing this. And this, now I represent the NDP. If you try to remove a French immersion programs from our schools in Winnipeg, that will just drive people to complete anarchy. That will not happen. And they understand that. The real challenge with French immersion pieces, of course, is recruitment. And currently our school divisions do a really good job of recruiting people that can teach in a French immersion background or in a French immersion milieu. The DSFM, of course, is for French-speaking families or one family member that has a French speaker or is able to communicate in French. You don't have to be Francophone. You just have to be able to communicate in French because everything is done in French at a DSFM school. So I hope that clears some things up.
That's helpful. Thank you. Does anyone else have questions for Betty? Well, hearing none, Betty, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. I'll just note that in the chat, a few folks have made suggestions as to where you could donate your education property tax refund check. I will say Winnipeg School Division has a charitable fund called the Children's Heritage Fund.
It's Heritage.
And
yeah, that's where I'm giving mine.
And they will actually issue a tax receipt, so you can receive that benefit for donating to it, and you can designate it for specific school if you wish, through that fund as well. So you can just Google Children's Heritage Fund. I'll drop the link in the chat here in a moment once I find it. So thank you, Betty, very much. I appreciate hearing your perspective as the board chair of the Board of Trustees, because of course this will have a huge potential impact on your role. And we do value the role of our democratically elected school trustees. They're a very important part of the democracy of our school education system as it stands now. And yeah, thank you.
So I just want to end, there should be a letter to the, an op-ed coming in the Free Press on Friday. So you guys can, they said they'll print it on Friday. So I think you'll be all very clear where I stand on this silliness. So thank you all for accommodating my work schedule. Have a great meeting. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, Betty. Great. Well, thank you. We're going to move on to Tamara Kuly, who I introduced earlier as a parent at École Luxton School, a neighbor of mine and a very active individual in our community. And I invited her here this evening to share her perspective as a parent and a member of Parent Council. And we'll turn things over to you. And Tamara, I will get your slide deck up in just a sec.
Okay, thanks, Brent. I'm a slide person because I think better once I've written everything down. So I'm going to share what I've written down and the pictures I've created with you. My name is Tamara Kuly. I live in the Luxton neighborhood and my kids both attend École Luxton School. As did I when I was a kid, actually. I live in the neighborhood now that I grew up in. When my husband and I bought our home in my old neighborhood, I started getting involved in the community and have served on École Luxton School PAC as secretary and chair in previous years. I'm not on the executive this year. We have Trish Cooper as our executive member, as our chair this year. But today I'm speaking to you as a parent and a community member. And there are three particular issues of concern that I wanted to talk about that I've been following and kind of building my angst again and seeing how Betty was feeling about things. I'm like, I feel that too. I totally understand where you're coming from. So the three items I have, and Brent, I'll get you to click 3 times. So representation changes. So the school divisions, what they offer in terms of representation for different communities versus the regions and the provincial advisory council. The second thing is the governance model and balanced budgets. So moving some paid trustee work to volunteer labor of parents. And the third point was this broken engagement model. And we got a good example of that tonight, but specifically Bill 64 does not align with Manitoba's Commission on K-12 Education Review recommendations. And so that's my starting point. So we'll start off with the first item. Brent, I'll get you to move forward one more. So current representation. So I just wanted to, I like pictures. I don't know if anybody else likes pictures, but I like pictures. So the current representation within education governance in Manitoba. Brent, if you want to forward it to the next. Don't have to look at the numbers. I'm going to tell you what all this means. But what this represents are the 37 school divisions and the population or the number of students that are within each one currently. So these numbers are based on the 2018 enrollment that was published and that was publicly available. So all of the numbers that I'm talking right now are a couple of years old. Things would have shifted a little bit, but they won't be profoundly different from this. So it's 37 school divisions, each with their own elected, locally elected board of trustees who are paid a little bit, not a lot, but paid to govern their respective school divisions and are representatives of the communities that elect them. Currently, there are more than 100 trustees doing this work in Manitoba throughout all of the school divisions. The number of students per divisions varies greatly, as you can see, from a mere 200 in the Whiteshell School Division, all the way up to 33,000 in the Winnipeg School Division. So there's a huge range. Obviously, not necessarily making a lot of sense, but that's where we're at right now. The average number of students per division is 5,100. So just so you know, what if all the 37 divisions had the same number of students, it would be 5,100 would be the average as we're standing right now for those divisions to manage. The 10 largest school divisions that represent almost 70% of students enrolled in public schools in Manitoba. Currently, Winnipeg School Division, River East, Transcona, Louis Riel, Pembina Trail, Seven Oaks, St. James, Assiniboia, and then out of the city, Brandon, Hanover, Frontier, and DSFM, and those are in ranked order. The 10 school boards that have, these 10 school boards have over the average number of students, so over that 5,100. All other 27 school boards have under that 5,100 students. So there's a huge disparity. So when the government right now talks about things aren't the same, things aren't equal, they're talking about these numbers. They're not talking about necessarily treatment of students or anything like that. They're talking about the size of the school divisions and how different they are. So this is one of their bones of contention, and this is the case. Brent, if you want to pass it forward one more. So the proposed representation under Bill 64. So down to the next slide, Brent. So this is what it will look like in terms of the number of students within each of the regions that are being proposed. Okay, 15 regions plus DSFM. So the 15 regions with administrative support to support each within the provincial government. So that will exist within government. It won't be outside of government. It'll be within directorships. And a 16-seat or 15-seat provincial advisory council. So PAC, Provincial Advisory Council, it's not the parent councils, it's the Provincial Advisory Council to Education. There's 15 seats there that are aligned to the regions, and DSFM remains unchanged, is outside of that model. The number of students per region, per proposed region, now will range from 2,500 to 99,000. So the Winnipeg region will be almost 100,000 students. That's one seat, one vote. And then you'll see the other pie pieces are quite a bit smaller. The average is 12,200 students per, and there's only one proposed area that actually has representative proportional representation. So the number of students matches the amount of votes they get on that PAC council. Next one, Brent. And again. All right, so the one on the left you've already seen. That's the proportional representation, the number of students. The one on the right is the amount of voting power each one of those regions has. So as I mentioned, the Winnipeg region, which actually will represent over 50% of students, 52.9% of students using the numbers that we had before, get one seat on that Provincial Advisory Council. And that one seat represents about 6.7% of voting power. So Winnipeg voices are shrunk down from being 52% of the population to having one vote that's worth just under 7% of the voting power. Frontier, Kelsey, Flin Flon, and Mystery Lake, that's like the division in the north. And that's what Betty was talking about in terms of Frontier talking to the government saying they should be removed from this process. But the north region that they've talked about is the only one that actually is proportionally appropriate representation. So 6.5% of the student population in Manitoba, and they have about 6.7% of the vote. The three regions that have no change or consolidation and represent smaller proportion of students than their seat in the PAC are Brandon, Hanover, and Seine River. All have 4.7, 4.3, 2.4% of students, but they have an elevated voting capacity as each region gets a 7% vote. So this is what I'm talking about when I go to proportional representation. So Brent, if you could forward to the next slide. All these stats, all these numbers land us here. There's one provincial advisory council of 15 individuals that replaces 36 school divisions or school boards with multiple wards, each represented by a trustee. So the SFM is unchanged. PAC will not govern areas of budget or collective bargaining. So that group, the parent group, won't have any access to to budget or collective bargaining pieces. These are two essential pieces that enable or disable any recommendation, because if they aren't funded or staffed, they won't happen. PAC is being relegated to the governance sidelines, centralizing all power and control, funding and admin to do with staff to the provincial government and away from local decision makers. So that's one change. The budget, doesn't matter that the PAC has representation, they won't even get to speak to budget. That moves away. Then after that, we talk about the disproportionate representation. So within this weakened system of governance, representation is skewed. Winnipeg students are underrepresented. They have 50% of the students and get 7% of the votes. The proposed new regions in the north is the only one that's actually reasonably proportionally represented, but it's a huge area. And then Interlake and Southern Manitoba students are overrepresented. There are 13 seats on the PAC committee that represent those areas. And so I have a couple of points here. Number one, Winnipeg and the North are historically progressive strongholds or swing ridings that determine who forms government in Manitoba. They are the areas that vote NDP most strongly, and then they're the ones where there are some swing votes happening. Interlake and Southern Manitoba are historically conservative strongholds. This government has designed a governance system for education that purposefully and grossly underrepresents students and families in regions that do not vote for them. The result is that a majority of small conservative regions will be guiding the provincial advisory council, and the diversity and complexity that Betty talked about earlier of our largest urban center will be completely diluted. This is a huge concern for me. In addition, given the single representation for each region, the diversity of needs and experiences of the students in these regions will be diluted at best and invisible at worst. Indigenous students in Winnipeg and the North will be underrepresented because one individual can't possibly represent all of those people. Newcomer students from communities that settle in Winnipeg will be underrepresented because one individual cannot possibly represent all of those people. These two demographic groups are the two fastest growing groups in the province. Community and neighborhood differences will be invisible. One or two PAC seats cannot effectively represent 110,000 students. Provincial and federal ridings aren't even that big. So to give you a sense of the change that the Conservative government is putting in place, they are politicizing our education system by the changes they're making. They are neutering the political voice within education. So this gets to my second point. So if we want to move to the second slide, or the second grouping, Brent. Thank you. Proposed replacement of elected and paid trustee positions. So existing parent advisory councils will be replaced by school community councils at each school, made up of parent volunteers through elections run by the school administration. These will work with school administration to make decisions about the school. From the many schools in each region, one parent will be serving on the SCC, and they'll be selected, we're not sure how, to represent that entire region at that 15-seat provincial advisory council. So the 70,000 students in Winnipeg and the hundreds of schools in Winnipeg will have one parent who represents them at that provincial advisory council. And Brent, if you could forward to the next one. So what that means for parents, so the parents who are on PAC or involved in the school, Bill 64 is designed to replace paid work with the volunteer labor of parents. Trustees work hard They certainly don't get paid for all of the time that they put in, but they do get paid something for the work that they're doing. The government is taking that work and moving it on to parent volunteers. They've asked for volunteers during this pandemic to help with testing lineups, and they're looking to volunteers to actually underwrite and balance a budget, which is complete garbage. Many parents and caregivers also can't give and can't give the time and will not participate in the process. And this is something that came through in our discussion earlier today at the BEST meeting. Many parents and caregivers cannot and will not participate. Time constraints, language barriers, and the spaces of schools actually feeling safe are just some of the barriers that will exist. And it's difficult enough right now to fill executive positions and gather enough volunteers together to meet the current needs of running a lunch program for students and raising enough money to fill the gaps left by insufficient funding. But more will be added to those groups. This is especially true in areas that are economically depressed and have a large newcomer Indigenous population. Work and family care responsibilities are already strained with straining many family resources. Language barriers prevent effective engagement and inclusion of a lot of the school community members, and there's no funding to remove this barrier. And as we are reminded again and again, schools are not perceived as safe or welcoming spaces for all. We need everyone at the table. Diverse voices essential to guiding a healthy, thriving education system in Manitoba will be effectively excluded from the process by a system designed for a select few who can fit this into their volunteer dependent model. So that's my second point. This is balancing the education budget on the backs of more volunteer labor. So Brent, if we can move to the third slide. So Bill 64 does not reflect the K-12 Ed report. They're two very large documents, and one of them is not really accessible. Bill 64 is really hard to get through. But here's a little summary of what the K-12 report from the commission came through with, and then what's been said afterwards. So in 2019, the Commission on K-12 Education conducted a multifaceted public and stakeholder engagement process to gather feedback from communities, parents, educators, students, including, and you see below there, 2,300 written submissions, 62 formal briefs, almost 9,000 public survey responses, 1,200 teacher survey responses, 159 educators submitted best practices, 1,700 people participated in public workshops, and 137 students participated in student-focused workshops. So I attended some of those sessions, and I can tell you that I was expecting potentially the commission to bring forward suggestions that were not aligned with what we heard at the sessions. And I was pleasantly surprised that there was a little bit of conservative overlay on that K-12 report. But the commissioners really heard and really reflected a lot of what was said in those meetings. And in response, Bill 64 basically completely ignores any of the recommendations that were put forward. It addresses one of the 75 recommendations made in the report, and it actually does something different than what the commissioners suggested. And a key piece of what the commissioner suggested was proportional representation, which this does not support. It also doesn't align with the feedback received from the people across Manitoba that local representation is essential to ensure local needs are met. And Brent, if you want to go to the last slide there, it's a few clicks. This is a summary. Oh, just go back one so that I can read this to people. Sorry, I'm just going to make my speaker stuff bigger. So this is an article written in the Free Press. It's a quotation from J.D. Lees. He was one of the commissioners who was a part of the process, and he's from Steinbach, and he's a conservative guy. And he came in, I met him when he came in to the process. he came in with a whole set of beliefs that he thought he knew exactly what was going to come out of this process. And through this process, he realized that the communities needed something different. And that's what they proposed in the K-12 report. And then after, when asked how Bill 64 aligns to that, this was the article that was written. So province's school board decision is a bit of a mystery, the commissioner says. Okay, Brent, we can go to the next one. The province's plan to dismantle English language school boards, which is at odds with the K-12 Education Review's recommendation to create super school boards with a mix of appointed and elected trustees, came as a surprise to one commissioner. I'll read the quote and then we'll move on. I had assumed there was some pressure to do what we eventually wound up recommending in our report, said J.D. Lees, a career teacher from Steinbach who was appointed to the 10-person commission tasked with examining the Manitoba public election system 2 years ago. Lees called the province's decision-making process a little bit of a mystery. And you can flip through to the last piece of this slide. One more. This is his quote. They didn't like the answer we came up with. You can recommend, but ultimately it's the government that decides what to do. The government paid this commission they used $700,000 of taxpayers' money to go out in 2019 and find out from parents, teachers, students, and the community what should happen. And then they completely ignored the conservative written report and are doing their own thing. So when we talk about effective engagement, asking, then ignoring and not addressing why you're ignoring any of the feedback that you received is a terrible way to start this process. And if they're asking us to trust this process, we'll change the governance model and then we'll do some other good things for education. I would bet that they are not to be trusted. And tonight I had a good example of that. As we were walking through some of the meetings, at I think it's called the best meetings tonight. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. They're talking about getting feedback and this engagement process. They had one meeting scheduled 5 days in advance for a community that has over 70,000 students in it in Winnipeg, to have talked to all the parents involved and to actually gather information. That is not an effective engagement process. I know this is my actual job, is engagement, and they didn't do that well. Afterwards, they said the next step is to, this week and next week, the last 2 weeks of school, connect with parent advisory councils to get guidance so that they can then make a recommendation in August. It is the end of the school year. Parent councils don't even meet in June most of the time. It's a pandemic year, so their engagement is false. So going off of that and the ignoring of the K-12 report, I am very hesitant to believe anything they say. I don't think that they are necessarily coming to the table with the truth, and their engagement seems quite false. So those are my thoughts as a parent, going through from representation concerns to this whole engagement process being faulty, and then the decision making and the heavy workload coming to volunteers. Those are my 3 concerns. So sorry, I took a lot of time there, but I've been thinking about this for a while when Brent asked me to speak. So
Thank you very much, Tamara.
Yeah.
There's some sobering and staggering numbers in there that I think most people aren't aware of, the sheer scale of the shift and the lack of representation that will result. So that's really important to see, and thank you for laying that out for us. As well as I think anybody who had any involvement with any of those sessions knew that, they were not very genuine, but the end result certainly cements that. I think what we will do is move on to Jennifer, and we'll save questions for the end. So I'm going to just quickly stop the screen share and welcome and introduce Jennifer Chen, who is president of the Women of Color Community Leadership Initiative, and just a very, very active person in community in Winnipeg, particularly in the newcomer community. And so Jennifer, thank you for joining us this evening, and we look forward to hearing from you. And I'll get your slides up in just a moment here.
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts on Bill 64 as a first-generation immigrant, a woman of color, and an advocate working with newcomer and immigrant communities.
There we go.
Yeah, so go to the next slide, please. I would like to focus on three main points: representation matters, education equity office, and systemic racism. Some of the points may be raised by Tamara, but I'll reiterate it through systemic racism lens. Since the announcement of the education reform in March, over the past 3 months, there are numerous news articles, op-eds, town halls that are organized by parent councils, different school boards, think tanks, grassroots groups, and universities. Just last Thursday, University of Manitoba Faculty of Education organized a webinar on Bill 64, and they will have another one this week. There were also webinars organized in the ethnocultural communities. I participated in one for the Filipino community and one for the Chinese community. We've heard concerns from school trustees, educators, parents, students, and community members across the society. So the voices against Bill 64 are not just a vocal minority. Next slide, please. Representation matters. I want to echo what Tamara has said. Replacing parent councils with school community councils and volunteer parents to take on the work of school trustees and school boards, only the most privileged parents who have access to time, wealth, and knowledge will be able to participate on the new school community councils, whose voices will not be heard. Marginalized, racialized, BIPOC, Indigenous, LGBTQ communities, communities with lower paid workers, immigrant and refugee families and children. We have Nova Scotia's example. When school boards were eliminated, representation of racialized educators and leaders was lost. And this representation leadership had taken decades to establish in school divisions. Here in Winnipeg, what I heard from newcomer parents is that teachers don't reflect diverse student populations, and students don't see themselves in teachers and leadership roles such as principals. Lack of representation in school community councils, advisory council, and authority council in the new system will result in lacking of representation in teachers and principals. So you may ask, what's the impact on students? Next slide, please. In September 2020, Newcomer Education Coalition released a research report called State of Equity in Education. A key guiding principle of this report is based on the belief that in order to improve academic outcomes for newcomer students, they need to see themselves better reflected in the curriculum and the teaching staff working in their schools. There are numerous research papers which found relationships between diversity of teachers and increased math and reading scores for students, high school graduation, few absences and suspension, and increased self-esteem and pride in students' cultural identity. In the city of Winnipeg, there is an underrepresentation of racialized people as school trustees, teachers, and students in the faculties of education. The teaching profession remains overwhelmingly white and middle class. I don't see this is being addressed in Bill 64. So the impact of lacking of representation at decision-making tables in teachers and leadership roles in Bill 64 are ultimately related to students' educational outcomes. Next slide, please. And this leads to a concept of education equity office, which comes from an independent external review of the Peel District School Board in Ontario. One of the key recommendations was to establish a new, robust education equity office and hire a superintendent of equity. This recommendation was endorsed by the Ontario Minister of Education in order to have an organizational structure in place to address issues of systemic racism on a proactive and ongoing basis. In Bill 64, I see very few strategies or mechanisms in terms of addressing systemic racism. The Nova Scotia government's appointed Provincial Advisory Council on Education legislated designated seats on the council for Mi'kmaq and American Nova Scotians representatives, along with a consensus rather than a majority rule decision-making process in order to better ensure all voices are being heard around this decision-making table. Manitoba's new Provincial Education Authority and Provincial Advisory Council on Education do not include these equity-based policy requirements in Bill 64. And I'm not saying that we should learn from Nova Scotia. I think we should not learn from Nova Scotia, but in Manitoba education reform, I don't see promising strategies that are being presented to address systemic racism in education system. Representation matters when it comes to who is included and excluded around decision-making tables in the public school system. The best possible decisions cannot be achieved if voices are missing in a problem-solving process, which in turn influences the prioritization of issues and allocation of resources. Next slide, please. Systemic racism. What Bill 64 really lacks is to look at education reform through a systemic racism lens. We must first acknowledge that no policies are neutral, and there is unbalanced power and exclusion in decision-making structures, and these decision-making structures impact the distribution of rights, opportunities, and resources. We should also acknowledge that the current system, school divisions and school boards have space to improve, and trustees have so much potential. We can have good trustees who feel it is important to connect the community and the school boards. This is especially critical for racialized populations whose voices have been silenced for a long time. In Bill 64, as an immigrant and a woman of color and a mother of 2 children, I don't see myself have a say in the new education system. So let's take action against Bill 64. Next slide, please. And I'd like to take action. Here I shared a few resources, including Canadian Center for Policies Alternatives held a webinar on public education lessons for Manitoba, and they have a recording on YouTube channel. University of Manitoba, as I mentioned, they will have their part 2 webinar talking about Bill 64 on Thursday, June 17th, 7 o'clock, and you can register. And join Manitoba Association of Parent Councils campaign, Education Vision Coalition, and they have a Facebook page. Join Manitoba School Boards Association's campaign. They also have a resource on their website. And check out other Facebook groups. There are so many good groups that are sharing information about Bill 64, and there are grassroots groups such as Manitobans Against Palestinian Education Reform, Action Committee regarding Bill 64, Parents for Public Education, MB, and Red for Ed MB. And pick up lawn signs. There are many lawn signs that you can choose, from Manitoba School Boards Association to Manitoba Teacher Societies to Liberals, NDP, and QP, Kids Not Cats signs. So let's take action against the Bill 64. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that really important perspective and for these tangible ways that we can continue to be further informed and take action. I'll just quickly make reference to the minister's hastily called press conference this afternoon, which I wasn't able to take in myself, but I kind of caught up and got the gist of it over Twitter afterwards. And let me tell you, there's a reason that that was called. It's because they, although they won't say it, they call us the vocal minority. We in fact are probably the vocal majority. The minister was asked twice by Maggie McIntosh of the Winnipeg Free Press, who supports this bill? He had no answer. He was asked twice, no answer. So with that, I'm going to thank you, Jennifer. Everyone, I will see if I can copy and paste all these great links and resources into the chat, but I will certainly email them all to you after the meeting as well. So I'm going to stop the screen share here. And again, if you can save your questions to the end, I'm going to now welcome and introduce Nello Altomare, who will finish off our panel this evening. Nello is the education critic for the official opposition, but also a lifelong educator and retired principal and teacher from the River East Transcona School Division, if I'm not mistaken. So thank you for joining us, Nello, and over to you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I want to thank the previous speakers, Tamara, Jennifer. What an act to follow. And certainly with a lot of not only wisdom, but also passion for this subject. And that's what the minister here is missing. People care about schools. People care about what their kids are doing at school. People know what their kids are doing at school because people as parents communicate with teachers all the time. That's good teaching. That's what good schools do. And Manitoba has a stellar reputation worldwide for an absolutely outstanding education system, one where international students line up to come and experience here in Manitoba. The other piece too is that Manitoba curriculum is also taught worldwide in Brazil, in China, in Great Britain, in other European countries. Why? Because it's highly regarded and recognized for not only its high engagement factor, but also because of its academic rigor. And we can't lose sight of that. The entire premise on Bill 64 is a sham, nothing more. I will tell you, Bill 64 is a power grab, nothing more. A power grab because school boards are pesky. They're pesky because they make the government look bad. And I will say they made the NDP look bad too, because we were not funding education properly and in a way it needed to be done. From when this particular political party took power in 2016, funding has now gone down to 60% provided by the provincial government. The other 40 comes from the education property tax base. Why so high? Because consistently this government has underfunded education. And what we found through the commission report and through many submissions is that, yes, we need to find different ways to fund public education. One of them is to get up to that sweet spot of 80-20, where 80% comes from the province and 20% comes from local property taxation, where it is equitable, because property tax is one of those taxes that is actually based on wealth. The more you have, the more you pay, which is the way it should be. That rebate check is a sham, because guess what? That really highlights how inequitable and how gross parts of this bill are. Because I will tell you, the people that get the largest checks will be able to provide the most for their particular schools. Why? Because they're in wealthier neighborhoods. So a person that was getting a $150 check, man, that's great to make a donation to the school. But imagine the suburbs surrounding the city and the rebates that are going out and the amount of money that they can give to their school. Now, factor this out in a fundraising capacity. Think about those schools that are located in areas that are well off. Well, their fundraising capacity will go through the roof because they'll want to provide for their kids. What of those schools now that don't have that capacity? That was what school boards did. They were the great equalizer. And what this bill does, and it is quite gross when you get into it, is that it takes all that equity pieces that we've worked on for years in Manitoba and flushes them out the door. And it is gross. And I'll give you another example of how terrible it is. We've already heard how some parents and some school community councils, well, yes, they'll have the ability to attract people to serve, but what about that person that's working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet? Right? They rely on that school trustee and on that school board to represent them. And let's not lose sight of this. This is a power grab because they want to silence certain voices. Make no mistake. This is clearly what it is. Why are people upset? Because they took the whole time to do the ed review, came up with quite a good report. One that reflected Manitobans' views on a sacred trust of public education. And what did they do? Absolutely nothing. This bill was written before the ed review came out. Make no mistake about it. And now they're reaping what they sow. And what they've sown is disbelief. What they've sown is a populace that is really upset about this bill. Because there's 2 things you don't do in this province. Don't mess with our schools and don't mess with our hospitals. And guess what? They're doing both. What they did to healthcare, they will do to education. Now, what can you do as a citizenry? What you're doing right now. Get involved, get yourselves on these forums. This is my 15th forum on Bill 64. And I have more set up over the summer. This is how passionate people are. Now, just wait till committee in the fall. When this gets second reading in October, and we'll be able to do this in person, we'll be there on the steps of the ledge. Not just the Manitoba NDP, but every organization that cares about public education will be there. We are over 400 presenters, and I dare them to shut that down early. And then you'll see, not only are you seeing the true colors now, you're seeing exactly what has motivated them. Now, I will also tell you in my own background, yes, I was a teacher and principal, and I happily retired in 2018. I had the opportunity to present at the commission, and it was a great experience. However, that report does not bear any, or Bill 64 does not bear any resemblance to that report. And that is what has people very upset. I'll end my presentation there, and hopefully I wrapped it up well for you, Brent, in this forum, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I didn't get to the principal, vice principal thing. I'm looking at the time, and I want to be respectful of people's time. So thank you again, everybody.
Thank you, Nello and Jennifer and Tamara and Betty, who has left us, for your insight, your perspective, and for sharing with us some really passionate and for good reason information. It feels pretty bleak, I have to say. I feel like, you know, we're up against, this is big, right? This is big, this is huge. And this is why we need to mobilize and get involved and be heard. I shared again in the chat how you can register to speak in committee. It's actually very easy. I registered last week, finally. I don't know what number I am, but they're approaching 400. I think the record currently for the most people to speak in committee is 424. That was back in 2008. So hey, let's smash that record and make a new one. We'll hold them hostage for literally weeks. Like, actually, I think we're approaching a unit of measurement of months at this point.
No, can I just want to clear that up, Brent.
Okay.
There's only going to be 9 sitting days of committee. But what that means, though, is that committee will run every night up until midnight. We'll run Saturday and Sunday, but it will have to be completed at the end of 9 sitting days, which takes us to about October 26, 27. Now, will everyone get heard? Likely not. However, the government can also extend it. And it is our hope that they would consider that.
Well, thanks for setting that record straight. And I'll just add too that the legislature session finished sitting, I think, just last week. And the government, even though the NDP can use, or the opposition can use certain procedural tactics to delay the second reading of a very finite number of bills. And you'll remember that we had like 31 bills, most of which the text was hidden from public and from everybody for a very long time. This was one of the ones that they chose to delay. The government tried to ram it through before the sitting closed last week. So they know they're running scared. They know that there is a majority opposition to what they're trying to do here. They won't admit to that, of course. But we do have them, we have the hair up on their backs at the very least. And we need to keep doing that. We need to put them to the coals. We need to activate. We need to get involved, or stay involved. Those of you that are here probably are here because you're passionate about education. You're involved. You're wanting to be more informed. Yeah, there are ways to do that. Thank you, Nello, though, for setting the record straight on how that actually works, because I think that is important to know. I wish we could hold them hostage for months, but maybe we won't get to that. But anyways, why don't we turn it over to questions? So if you can, speak your question, use the raise hand feature. But if that doesn't work, I'll try to catch you on the screen, or feel free to put your question in the chat, and I'm happy to read it for you as well. And while you're all formulating your very excellent questions, I just want to give a shout out to Tina, who had some really good ones in the session earlier this evening. So thank you, Tina and Tamara, both for those very excellent questions at the, I'm calling it the worst strategy. I'm no longer gratifying them with their own terminology. Tina, go ahead.
You may or not know the answer to this. I just know that I think her name was Barb Sorelli, was speaking at the very end of that meeting about another discussion meeting. I think with parent council meetings. Because they closed it off before she got to say what it was. Does anybody know what that was?
So she's the executive director of the Manitoba Association for Parent Councils, I believe, and they have a movement. They're putting together, please someone jump in if you know more about it actually, but oh, Brenda, are you here, Brenda? Go ahead.
I am. Hi.
Go for it.
So the lady you're referring to is Marianne Zurilli. Manitoba Association of Parent Councils has hired her as a facilitator to run the program that we started, a coalition called Education Vision Coalition, which will be announced tomorrow. So we have a news conference with a number of reporters tomorrow, so that we can let the province know that we've started that. Yes, she was very rudely cut down, and that's not the first time, and it won't be the last, I'm sure. We're starting to get used to it. So we've had a number of sessions already. We've had a number of round 2 sessions. Our first session we did, I think, 6 sessions. Round 2 we did probably 4 sessions. For those of you who don't know Marianne, I know Nello knows her very well. She was a past MLA. She is a past, she's still a school teacher. She is a substitute teacher. She's been in advocacy for many years, so it's not like we just pulled her name out of a hat. We wanted to make sure that we had the right person to do this. So we've hired her to help facilitate this, and this is obviously something that MAPC feels strongly about. For us, we know that this could potentially mean the end to Manitoba Association of Parent Councils, because we have been the parent voice since 1912. In 2013, we were put into legislation, and then we were informed a few months back when the review came out by Dana Rudy that this would mean we would no longer be the parental voice in education in Manitoba. So now when you think about all the things that are going on in Manitoba right now, they have reduced our funding to less than $100,000 a year. You'd think with COVID and with the things that are going on that they would increase the funding to get extra help. So imagine all those phone calls. And I can relate to that one person out of that for those 15 regions, because I'm getting those phone calls. I'm getting those emails that start at 7 in the morning and at 10 o'clock at night. So they just don't understand. And as much as we try to get them to understand, my point in them tonight, talking to them tonight, was that we supplied a submission to the K-12 review, and our top 4 things or top 3 things were poverty, inclusion, and smaller class sizes. Where are you including that in that document? And I reiterate her words to me were, go and look at the best document. I don't want to look at the best document. I want to look at your document, and I want the words to come out of your mouth saying that this is going to happen. Because you did this when we started the whole situation with the COVID. You were telling us parents that parents don't need a doctor's note for their children to do online education. And then 2 weeks after that happened, you said, hey, no, you need a doctor's note. I asked the question to her and Minister Gertson, and we were told, nope, we're going by parents' word. Well, we're no longer going by your word. So now this is what we have. Going against them, yes, this could mean we lose our funding, but we also know that our children of Manitoba are worth it. So you don't have to join the coalition. You don't have to have attended other meetings. We can walk you through it. We want people to join that have 10 minutes. We want people to join that have 6 hours, whatever you can give. After this, I'll be going and posting a whole bunch of stuff to the website so that by tomorrow, there'll be toolkits and everything that you can go to your community and to your schools on how to get them involved in Bill 64. Talking to your friends, your family, the grocery store clerk, just about everybody, right? Because it's not only affecting us here in Winnipeg, it's affecting our grandparents, it's affecting the rural communities. How does that look? You know, if you're taking away in the rural community, if you're taking away the elderly from coming into the community schools and assisting and volunteering, that's a lot what all communities have, are those people to volunteer. And probably 60% of the people living in rural Manitoba work in the school. So what are we can't wrap our heads around it because we're not getting any answers. And I go back to when COVID first started, here's another plan that's not a plan. They're not being very transparent. They're not being transparent with parents. And how do you go from not having a voice in education to now running the school? It just makes no sense. So if anyone has any questions, they can email me at info@MAPC. I'll put it in the chat and we'd love to hear from you.
That'd be great. And if you could throw the website in there too, Brenda, I'd appreciate it.
Will do. Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening,
problem.
and for bringing up these points just now too. I will say that when the very first thing that stood out to me when when Bill 64 was made public and the best worst strategy was poverty. I mean, that is the number one barrier to our student success in Manitoba, and they refuse not only to acknowledge that, but they purposely avoid that issue, and that is huge. Okay, we do have a question in the chat for Nello. from Nicholas. What is the most effective way to apply pressure on our local MLA to find out their intention on how they plan to vote on Bill 64? In other words, dear Rochelle Squires, where do you stand on Bill 64?
The best thing that I would do is I would get a group of parents together that, you know, from a particular school and ask for a Zoom meeting like this with your MLA. The other thing you can do, of course, is write a letter, but I think actually asking for a meeting and getting some face-to-face time with your MLA is something that you certainly have the right to do. And I wouldn't take no for an answer. I would say, here are, you know, this is something that we're really concerned about. We would like to know, how are you going to represent our voice when you're at the legislature? That's what I would do.
That's helpful, thank you. I'm going to twist that question around a little bit because I live in a riding where I'm thankful that I have NDP representation. But for someone like me who does not have a Conservative MLA currently, what is the best approach for me? I mean, I know Nahanni represents my views well on this issue, but I'm curious, how can I, as an individual who doesn't live in a Conservative riding, have my voice be heard?
You can also write the Premier, of course, and the Minister of Education. The other thing as a citizen, of course, and you know this, Brent, is to present at committee. Though that we're one of 2 provinces in Canada that allow that. And that's a real opportunity for you as a citizen to really express how you feel about this bill. Now, you may think, okay, with this many people presenting, I won't have the opportunity to actually get my 10 minutes. But you can also have a written submission. Just like the K-12 Ed review, you could have a written submission. You don't have to do it in person. So those are the avenues that are open to you. And of course, joining any one of the groups that Brenda reviewed and that Jennifer reviewed and Betty and Tamara. And of course, fight bill64.ca through the Manitoba NDP. Those are the avenues that you have as citizens.
Great, that's helpful. I will say, I have 2 lawn signs, one Liberal and one NDP, and I have others on order. I plan to put one at our vacation property. They are great conversation starters. When I'm out doing yard work or washing the car or whatever, I have a front driveway, which is rare in our neighborhood, but it's a place where I spend some time. And I've had people stop and ask me, what is this Bill 64? I mean, it's a little bit amazing to me that there are people who don't know at this point, but they're out there. But those are people who could vote too, right? And so it's important to have a friendly conversation. Don't assault them with your opinions right away, because you might scare someone off. But you know, have a constructive conversation, and it's a great way to advocate. We do have another question in the chat. This is from Debbie with École Lansdowne. Hi, Debbie. Wouldn't it be better? And this, I'll direct this at all the panelists. I'm not sure who would like to respond to this, or maybe you all would. Wouldn't it be better to ask for the bill to be edited with all the concerns raised? In other words, more representation, designated positions, etc., rather than just killing the bill? I do think that there needs to be education reform.
I have a thought on that. I'll just go quickly. I don't have any specific policy or process knowledge, but I agree. I think that the idea that everything was perfect is where we'll fall down on the argument. I think that if it's a discussion about what could we do to augment a strong system and change and address some of the issues, that's the real conversation. And so, yeah, cutting this bill, I think, is a non-starter because it fundamentally changes and removes representation and funding and funded positions and relies on volunteers to do the work. So I would say the bill needs to go, but I would also say that there could be some great things coming forward, great ideas that have already been provided to this government in suggestions for reform that could happen in a different bill. It's just not their view and it's not their vision. They want to consolidate power and control all the funding. So I completely agree. It's there's always positives and changes that can be made, and we need to be open to that. Saying that everything was perfect before will be where we lose a lot of people.
Thank you, Tamara. Nello, you have thoughts to share as well.
At the committee stage, or either written or in person or done live, you can come with amendments that you would suggest. We are certainly, I myself will certainly have amendments that we're going to suggest, and we'll be doing that at the legislature in October when this bill gets second reading. We will come up with amendments. Now, of course, I mean, they have a majority. They're going to kill every amendment that we come up with. However, when citizens show up with potential amendments at the committee stage, that is absolutely where you can come with suggestions to make the bill better, right? I mean, in the end, this is all about our kids. This isn't about them consolidating power. This is about kids. This is about how we educate youth. This is about the public system and the public good, right? Which has been lost in this. And so, yes, coming with amendments and possible suggestions for improvements, absolutely.
Great, thank you. And Jennifer actually put a great suggestion in the chat. You can put pressure on PC MLAs who are in swing ridings, such as in suburban Winnipeg. And just as a perfect example, in our school community, so École Lansdowne is actually straddled, I believe, by 3 provincial ridings, one of which is the McPhillips riding. And that one was very hotly contested in the most recent election. It did go to partly because there was a reconfiguration, I think, of ridings that affected that one a bit. And Shannon Martin, former PC MLA for Morris, who lost his riding because it disappeared in the reorganization, ran for election in McPhillips and won by a fairly small margin, I believe. Greg McFarland, who is the current chair of this, sorry?
64 votes.
Yeah. Oh, isn't that ironic? 64 votes. Oh my word. Oh boy. I think, anyway, I don't even know what to say to that, actually. I'm shocked. Anyways, that's a perfect example. And so we have parents in our school community who are in that riding. And, you know, you talk to those parents who are in that riding, who can have a direct line of communication and some influence on Shannon Martin, their MLA in McPhillips. These are things we can do and we need to do. Oh yeah, and a question in the chat about the recording. Yes, the session has been recorded, so it'll probably take me a while, but I will find a place to host it and send out the link so that you can share it, rewatch it, or share it with other folks that you know. You know, we have to just keep helping each other and making a difference, getting the word out, and making our thoughts and concerns known on this. Do we have any other questions? We're coming up on our time, recognizing that it's 10 o'clock on what is tonight? Monday night? Goodness, feels like it should be the end of the week already. We've only just begun. Goodness, well, not seeing any questions. I do want to thank Nello and Jennifer and Tamara for giving us of their time and experience and expertise this evening, and to everyone else for joining us. Thank you for being concerned and wanting to educate yourself on this issue. There are many more sessions and many things you can do. It seems overwhelming, I will admit, but even if you do just one thing, that's a step in the right direction. And if we all do one thing, that'll get us that much closer to change. So thank you for joining us this evening, and I will email all the resources from the slide decks and other things to everyone. I might not get to it tonight, but tomorrow for sure. And yeah, seek those things out and take action. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Brent, for organizing.
My absolute pleasure.
Yep. Good night, everybody.
Good night.